telegram arrived on a Tuesday, which was already a bad day for Adeline Marsh. She'd spent the morning scrubbing the floors of the schoolhouse where she'd taught for 3 years. The same floors she'd walked across every morning, believing that being good at something was enough to make people keep you. The school board had decided otherwise. Too many opinions, the chairman had told her. Too much independence for a woman in her position. They'd hired a man from Ohio to replace her. He started Monday. So she was on her knees, scrubbing floors she no longer owned, when her neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, appeared in the doorway holding an envelope. "It's addressed to you," Mrs. Caldwell said. "Came to my house by mistake." Adeline sat back on her heels and looked at the return address. Harlan Cross, Rimrock Station, Montana Territory. She didn't know anyone in Montana. She opened it anyway. The message inside was short and written in the kind of handwriting that suggested a man who didn't spend much time at a desk. "Miss Marsh, your name was given to me by Reverend Holt of the First Presbyterian in St. Louis. He says you're a teacher, capable and serious-minded. I have a son, age 9, who hasn't been in a proper classroom since his mother died 2 years ago. I run cattle outside Rimrock Station. The work is hard and the winters are worse. I cannot offer romance or softness. I can offer a fair wage, a room with a door that locks, and a child who needs someone steady. If you're interested, write back. If not, no offense taken. Harlan Cross." Adeline read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her apron pocket. That night she wrote back. She didn't tell her sister Adelaide or her mother. She didn't tell anyone because telling people meant explaining herself, and she was tired of explaining herself. She'd spent 26 years explaining herself to people who had already decided what she was before she opened her mouth. Plain spoken. Too direct. Not the kind of woman men looked at twice at church socials, her mother had once said, with the particular brand of kindness that isn't kind at all. She sent the letter on Wednesday. By Thursday, she'd decided she was being foolish. By Friday, she'd decided it didn't matter whether she was foolish or not, because she had no job, $43 saved, and a family who loved her in the distracted way people love furniture. Present, occasionally useful, easy to overlook. His response came in 11 days. "I'll send train fare. Come when you're ready. Bring warm clothes." That was all. She came. The train ride from St. Louis took 4 days and felt like crossing into another country. The land flattened, then opened, then rose into something vast and indifferent that made Adeline feel both very small and, strangely, very free. She watched it change through the window for hours, eating bread she'd packed and drinking terrible coffee from the dining car, and thought about all the things she was leaving behind. The classroom. The neighbors who'd watched her grow up and still saw the 12-year-old who'd fallen off the church roof trying to retrieve a kite. Her mother's kitchen, which smelled like cinnamon and low-grade disappointment. The life she'd built that fit her the way a coat fits someone else. Functional but never quite right. She was not afraid, or she was afraid, and she'd decided that fear was not a good enough reason to stay somewhere that had stopped working. Rimrock Station was 2 buildings and a platform. That was being generous. Adeline stepped off the train into cold air that hit her like a closed hand, and looked around at the gray sky, the brown hills, the single wagon waiting near the far end of the platform with 2 horses and a man standing beside it, who did not wave or smile or do anything that could be called welcoming. He was tall. That was the first thing she noticed. Tall and broad-shouldered and weathered in the way of men who spend most of their lives outside. The kind of weathered that adds years to a face without making it old. He had dark hair going gray at the temples and the expression of a man bracing for something unpleasant. She walked toward him because there was no one else to walk toward. "Harlan Cross," he said, when she was close enough. "Adeline Marsh." He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at livestock he was considering buying. Methodical. Without cruelty, but without warmth either. "The boy's waiting at the ranch," she said. "Climb up." He loaded her trunk without asking if she needed help, which she didn't, and she climbed onto the wagon seat without waiting to be handed up, which he seemed to notice. They rolled out of Rimrock Station in silence. The silence lasted 6 miles. "You taught school," he said finally. It wasn't a question. 3 years. 4th through 8th grade. "Why'd you stop?" She considered softening it. She decided not to. "School board replaced me with a man. Said I had too many opinions." The line of his jaw shifted slightly. He kept his eyes on the road. "That's their loss," he said. It was such an unexpected thing to say that Adeline forgot to respond. The ranch appeared as they came over a rise, a long low house of weathered timber with a barn behind it, and corrals stretching out to the east. Smoke came from the chimney. Everything looked solid and well used, and slightly grim in the way of places where function matters more than beauty. "It's not much to look at," Harlan said. "That looks like it works," she said. He glanced at her then, quick, the first time he'd really looked at her directly. Then he turned back to the road. They pulled up to the house, and a boy burst through the front door before the wagon stopped moving, skidding to a halt in the dirt and staring up at Adeline with enormous dark eyes that were entirely his father's. "This is my son," Harlan said. "Fletcher. Fletcher Cross." He was small for 9, with a serious face and hair that needed cutting, and an expression that suggested he had learned early not to expect much. He looked at Adeline the way children look at things they want, but had been disappointed by before. "You're the teacher?" he asked. "I am." "Do you give a lot of homework?" "Not if you do the work in class," she said. He thought about this. "Okay," he said. "I'll show you your room." He grabbed her hand without asking and pulled her toward the house. Behind her, she heard something that might have been a breath of laughter from Harlan Cross, though when she glanced back his expression was neutral. The room was small and clean, with a narrow window looking east over the grazing land. Someone had put a jar of dried wildflowers on the dresser, slightly lopsided. She suspected Fletcher. "It's not much," Harlan said from the doorway, echoing himself. "It's mine," she said. "That's enough." She meant it. The first week was the hardest. The work wasn't what frightened her. She was used to work. She could cook, she could clean, she could manage a household. She'd been doing those things since she was 12. What frightened her was the silence. Not the quiet of the hills and the wind, which she found she liked better than expected. The silence between herself and Harlan Cross, which had a weight to it she couldn't read. He was not unkind, he was not warm. He came home from the range at dusk every evening, ate whatever she'd made without complaint and with genuine appetite, answered her questions in complete sentences but rarely offered anything more. He was a man who had built walls, and then forgotten there were walls, and started thinking of them as just the shape of himself. Fletcher was easier. Fletcher was, in fact, a revelation. He was whip-smart and starving for it, for books and problems and someone who thought his questions deserved real answers. He'd had sporadic schooling before his mother died and almost none since, taught at home by a rotating series of ranch hands who could read but didn't particularly enjoy it. He greeted every lesson. Adeline set him with the focused intensity of someone making up for lost time. "Can you make more?" he asked on the third day, looking at the stack of problems she'd given him. "You finished those already?" He showed her the paper. Every answer was correct. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went and found more paper. By the second week, she'd developed a routine. Lessons with Fletcher in the morning, household work in the afternoon, a walk in the early evening to learn the land. She was learning it the way she learned most things, methodically, on foot, paying attention. The ranch hands watched her with cautious curiosity. There were 4 of them, a quiet Swede named Birch who'd been with Harlan for 8 years, 2 brothers from Texas who were polite enough, and a young man named Declan who was 20 years old and cocky about it. She was hanging laundry on her second Thursday when she heard the argument start in the barn. By the time she got there, Declan had one of the Texas brothers up against a post, and the other one was circling with his fists up. She didn't hesitate. "Put him down," she said. 3 sets of eyes turned to her. "This doesn't concern you," Declan said. "You're fighting in Mr. Cross's barn." She stepped closer. "It concerns me. What started this?" The explanation came out in pieces, sullen and overlapping. A mistake with the horses, blame being assigned, pride getting in the way of sense. Adeline listened to all of it. Then she looked at Declan. "You've been here longest. Does that make you responsible for the mistake, or responsible for how it gets handled?" He blinked. "The latter," he said after a moment. "Then handle it that way." He let the other man go. There was some muttering, some posturing, and then they all went back to work, none of them quite meeting her eyes. Birch was waiting outside the barn when she came out. He watched her with a steady Scandinavian calm that reminded her of her grandfather. Harlan's going to hear about that, he said. She nodded. He's going to want to know how you handled it, Birch continued. He studies people. Adeline looked out at the hills. Good, she said. I'd rather be studied than dismissed. That night at dinner, Harlan was quiet in a different way than usual. Attentive, almost. Fletcher chattered about his lessons, about a hawk he'd seen on the ridge, about whether it was true that Montana had been a territory longer than any other place in the country. Adeline answered him and did not look at Harlan until she felt him looking at her. Birch told me about the barn, he said. I assumed he would. You didn't have to step in. No. She met his eyes. But someone had to, and I was there. He studied her the way he'd studied her at the train station. Except this time it felt less like assessment, and more like something else she couldn't name. You could have gotten hurt, he said. Declan wasn't going to hit me. She passed him the bread. He's not cruel, just young. There's a difference. A long pause. Then Harlan reached for the bread, and their fingers didn't quite touch, and the moment passed. But something had shifted in the room, small as a degree on a compass, but real. The town of Rimrock Station was less forgiving than the ranch. She went in with Harlan on the third Saturday of the month, riding in the wagon while Fletcher sat between them and narrated everything they passed. The main street had a general store, a post office, a saloon, a church, and about 40 people who were all very interested in Adeline Marsh. She felt it the moment she stepped down from the wagon. Eyes. Not hostile exactly, but measuring. Categorizing. The school teacher, someone said, behind a hand, and someone else replied, well, she's no great beauty, is she? And that was followed by a particular kind of laughter that Adeline had been hearing her entire life. She'd learned to walk through it. Inside the general store, a woman in a very clean dress approached her with the bright smile of someone who has decided to be magnanimous. Marietta Faulkner, she said, extending her hand. My husband owns the mill. We're so glad someone finally took poor Fletcher in hand. The boy's been running half wild since his mother passed. Fletcher's doing very well, Adeline said pleasantly. Well, of course. Marietta's smile stayed fixed. And how are you finding ranch life? It must be quite the adjustment, coming from a city. The isolation alone can be so difficult for some women. I grew up on a farm, Adeline said. I find the quiet suits me. She excused herself before Marietta could regroup. The women of Rimrock Station were not cruel, exactly. They were small town, which meant they were warm in clusters and cold at the edges, and they saved their real opinions for the spaces between words. She'd grown up with women like this. She knew how to read them, and she'd learned not to need their approval, which was the only protection that actually worked. What she hadn't expected was the woman she met outside the post office. Agnes Reed. She was 40, maybe, with a no-nonsense face and ink stains on her fingers. She ran the post office and, Adeline would learn, wrote the only newspaper in Rimrock County from a desk in the back room. You're the one who broke up the barn fight, Agnes said, without introduction. Word travels fast. In a town this size, word travels instantaneously. Agnes studied her without apology. I heard you didn't back down. I also heard you didn't embarrass any of them more than necessary. That's a harder thing than it sounds. They deserve the chance to choose better. Adeline paused. Not everyone is beyond that. Agnes smiled, the real kind, quick and crooked. I've been in this town 20 years, and nobody said anything that interesting to me in at least 3. Come by sometime. I'll make coffee. Fair warning, it's terrible. Adeline laughed. She hadn't expected to. The winter announcement came 2 weeks later. Harlan came in from the range one evening, with the look she'd learned to read as serious, and sat down at the kitchen table without taking his coat off. Early storm coming, he said. Going to be bad. We'll need to move the cattle to the near pasture before it hits. Means all hands out tomorrow at dawn. What do you need from me? He looked at her like she'd surprised him. Keep Fletcher inside, he said. Keep the fires going. Food and water enough if we're stuck inside for days. She was already making lists in her head. Understood. He started to rise, then stopped. You don't panic, he said. It wasn't a question, more like he was confirming something he'd been thinking for a while. Not usually. She met his eyes. Does it matter? It matters when you're this far from help and things go wrong. He was quiet for a moment. Sarah, my wife, she panicked. Every time. It wore on both of us. Adeline understood he hadn't meant to say that much. She didn't make it strange. Panic doesn't help anything, she said simply, and there's usually something useful to do instead. Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile, something quieter. Go get warm, she said. I'll have supper ready in 20 minutes. He went. The storm hit the next night. It came fast and white and total, swallowing the ranch inside a howl that shook the window glass and made Fletcher press close to Adeline's side without acknowledging he was doing it. She let him. They played cards by the fire, and she read aloud from the 2 books she'd brought, and they ate the soup she'd kept warming on the stove, and pretended together that they were not listening for the sound of horses through the wind. 3 hours. 3.5. Fletcher fell asleep against her shoulder. The door opened. Harlan came in with ice on his coat in the particular gray exhaustion of a man who has been fighting something larger than himself. 3 ranch hands followed. All of them made it. All the cattle were in. She helped them out of their frozen things. She put hot coffee in their hands. She did not make a fuss, and she did not cry with relief, though the feeling was there, heavy and complicated in her chest. When the others had gone to the bunkhouse, Harlan sat by the fire, thawing out slowly. Adeline sat across from him. Fletcher was still asleep on the couch. You were afraid, Harlan said quietly. Not an accusation. Yes. But you stayed steady for him. He nodded toward Fletcher. That's the job. He looked at her, then. The long look, the one he gave. Things he was trying to understand fully before he made up his mind about them. No, he said. It's more than that. She didn't answer. There was nothing to say to that, nothing that wouldn't be more than she'd agreed to when she came here. But something had changed, quiet and irreversible like snow settling. The trouble came in January. His name was Cornelius Vance, and he wore his wealth the way men wear cologne, liberally, and as if everyone else should be grateful for it. He arrived in Rimrock Station claiming to represent a land consortium from Chicago, and made his interest in the Cross Ranch known inside of 48 hours. The ranch sat on the only reliable water source for 20 miles. Harlan had known for years that made him a target. He'd been fending off interest in various forms since the land titles were filed. Vance was different. Vance had lawyers and patience, and the particular smile of a man who considers himself to be doing you a favor by wanting what you have. He came to the ranch on a Wednesday afternoon, uninvited, while Harlan was on the range. Adeline answered the door. Cornelius Vance, he said, removing his hat with theatrical courtesy. Is Mr. Cross available? He's not. She didn't step back. I'm Adeline Cross. She said it without thinking. The name felt strange in her mouth, but she didn't take it back. Vance's smile adjusted slightly. Of course. He looked her over in the way she despised. The quick calculation of a man deciding whether a woman is worth his time. Mrs. Cross. I'd hoped to speak with your husband about a business opportunity. You can speak with me, she said. I manage the household accounts. It was true. Harlan had handed that over in December with the same efficiency with which he delegated everything, clearly, without ceremony, based purely on who could do it best. Vance stepped inside. He spoke for 15 minutes about market conditions and land values, and the particular challenges facing independent ranchers in the modern economy. He was very good at it, which meant he was very good at making a threat sound like charity. When he finished, Adeline said, "The ranch isn't for sale." At any price? At any price. He smiled again. Mrs. Cross, I think you should discuss this with your husband before. I've discussed it with my husband, she said, which was not strictly true yet. The answer will be the same. You've made a long trip for nothing, Mr. Vance. I'm sorry for your trouble. His eyes went flat for a moment. Then the smile came back. Well, it's an open offer. Circumstances have a way of changing. He left. Adeline closed the door, stood in the hallway for a moment, then went back to the accounts she'd been working on. Her hands were steady. That evening, she told Harlan everything. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, his face had gone very still. I said we weren't selling, she added. I hope that was right. It was right. He looked at the table. You said you'd discussed it with me. I said I would discuss it with you. She met his eyes. I wasn't going to let him think there was an opening. Something shifted in Harlan's expression. Not quite the thing she'd seen in him by the fire during the storm, but connected to it. Like a door opened slightly further. "You're not afraid of men like that," he said. "I'm afraid of them." She kept her gaze steady. "I just don't let the fear do the talking." He was quiet for a long time. Then he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. It was the first time he'd touched her. His hand was rough and warm, and it stayed there only a moment before he took it back. But she noticed, and from the look on his face, so did he. Vance's next move came fast. He filed a challenge to the water rights, claiming a historical survey placed the creek's headwaters outside the cross property boundary. It was a lie wrapped in paperwork, which was the most dangerous kind of lie because it required time and money to undo. Adeline found the flaw on a Thursday night. She'd asked Harlan for every document he had related to the ranch's founding. Deeds, surveys, correspondence, all of it, and spread them across the kitchen table after Fletcher was in bed. Harlan sat across from her, and for the first time she saw him look something close to helpless. "The original survey from 1871, she said. "The one that Vance's lawyers are citing. Do you have a copy?" He produced it. She studied it for a long time. "This isn't the original survey," she said. "What?" She pointed. "The surveyor's mark here, the notation in the lower right corner." She'd seen similar documents in her years of teaching local history. This notation style wasn't standardized until 1873. She turned the paper over. "And this paper stock." She held it up to the lamp. "It's been treated to look old, but it's not. Harlan, this document is a forgery." The silence that followed was the particular silence of a man recalculating everything. "Can you prove that?" he said. "I can show a judge exactly where to look," she said. "The rest is up to someone who knows land law. Do you have a lawyer?" He did. The lawyer, a careful man named Aldous. She blinked at the name on the file and set it aside. A careful man named Prescott out of Helena came by rail and arrived looking skeptical. He left looking considerably less so. Adeline walked him through each point methodically. The anachronistic notation, the paper treatment, the timeline of the water rights claim against the documented history of use. "How do you know all this?" Prescott asked near the end. "I taught history for 3 years," she said, "and I paid attention." Vance came by the ranch one more time before the court date. Adeline was alone when he arrived, Harlan having ridden out early. She met him on the porch, and she was not carrying a rifle. She didn't need one. "I want you to think carefully," Vance said, "about the position you're putting your family in." "I've thought about it," she said. "A man with resources and patience can make life very difficult for people who—" "Mr. Vance." Her voice was level and clear. "We found the forgery. Your lawyer knows we found the forgery, because our lawyer has already told his lawyer. You can proceed to court and be publicly exposed for fraud, or you can withdraw. Those are your options." She met his eyes without blinking. "I'd recommend the second one." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he left. He did not come back. The withdrawal of Vance's claim came 2 weeks later. There was no celebration. Harlan came in from the range, and she handed him the document across the kitchen table, and he sat down and read it twice. And when he looked up at her, she saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. He didn't have words for it yet, but she recognized it anyway. That night, after Fletcher was in bed, Harlan knocked on her door. She opened it. He was standing in the hallway looking like a man who has decided to say something difficult and is determined to do it properly. "I've been thinking," he said. "All right." "About the arrangement." She waited. He ran a hand through his hair. A gesture she'd come to understand meant he was approaching the outer limits of what came naturally to him. "What you've done here," he said. "For Fletcher. For the ranch. The way you handled Vance, and the barn and the storm." He stopped. "You didn't come here for any of that. You came here for a wage and a room with a door that locks. That's what I offered you." "That's what you offered," she agreed. "It's not enough," he said. "That's what I'm trying to say." He looked at her directly. "It's not enough for what you've given. And I'm not good at this. Sarah used to say I was made of granite, that she could never get through." He stopped. I don't want to make promises I can't keep." Adeline leaned against the doorframe. "What kind of promises could you keep?" He was quiet for a moment. "The honest kind," he said. "That I see you. That you're not invisible here, not to me, not to Fletcher, not to anyone on this ranch." He cleared his throat. "That what you want matters, your opinion, your judgment, your chidgment, your chidgment, your chidgment, your searched for the word, your future." The sentence landed the way important things do, simply and completely. "I'm not asking for granite to turn into something else," she said after a moment. "I'm asking for honesty. If you can give me that, we'll figure out the rest." He reached out and took her hand, and this time he didn't take it back. Spring came to Rimrock County with the particular relief of spring in difficult country, big and fast, everything greening at once like the land was making up for lost time. Adeline wrote to her sister. Not to explain herself, she'd stopped needing to explain herself somewhere around November, but because Adelaide had written 3 times and deserved an answer. She described the ranch and the hills and Fletcher's growing collection of rocks. She described Agnes Reed's terrible coffee and the women's meetings she'd started attending, not because she needed to, but because there were things she could offer, and she'd decided to stop waiting for permission to offer them. She described Harlan last, carefully, the way you describe something that matters, and you're not sure you have the right words for yet. "He's not easy," she wrote. "He's not soft. But he's honest, and he's trying, and trying matters more than people think it does." Fletcher found her in the garden one afternoon in April, sitting between the rows she put in for vegetables, pulling weeds. He sat down beside her without being asked, which had become his habit. "Are you going to stay?" he asked. She looked at him. He was 10 now. His haircut was still perpetually overdue, but his face had changed over the months, something easier in it. "Yes," she said. "Like permanently?" "Like permanently." He nodded, processing this with the seriousness he applied to most things. Then his face went to the thing she'd come to love best about it. The sudden complete smile that looked exactly like his father's on the rare occasions Harlan let it through. "Good," Fletcher said, "because I told Billy Farrell my mother was a better teacher than his. I need you to keep proving that." Adeline laughed so hard she had to put down her trowel. Harlan found her still in the garden an hour later, still smiling. He sat down on the fence rail and watched her for a while. The sun was going down behind the mountains, and the light was the particular gold of late afternoon in that country. The kind of light that makes even difficult land look like something worth having. "You're happy," he said. Not a question, just an observation, the way he observed most things. "I'm surprised to be," she said. "Why?" She sat back on her heels and thought about it. "Because I didn't come here for happiness. I came here to be useful, to matter." She looked up at him, and somewhere in between those two things, this became home. He was quiet for a moment. Then he climbed down from the fence and came to stand beside her, and she looked up at him against the gold sky. "I love you," he said. "I'm sorry it took me so long to say it right." She stood up. Dirt on her hands, hair loose, the plain, ordinary, beautiful mess of a life being lived. She put her dirty hand against his face anyway. "I know," she said. "I loved you back before I had language for it." He kissed her there in the garden in the long afternoon light, slow and sure, and full of all the things that take time to become true. Summer arrived with a letter from her sister. Adelaide was coming west, if the invitation was still open. She'd packed 2 trunks, she wrote. She wasn't sure she was brave enough. She was coming anyway. Adeline wrote back the same day. "Come," she wrote. "Bring the 2nd trunk. Leave behind anything that doesn't serve you. This country doesn't forgive dead weight, but it rewards people who show up and mean it." She sealed the letter and walked it to the post office herself. Through the main street of Rimrock Station, where people now nodded when they saw her, and occasionally stopped to ask her opinion on things that mattered. The school board in town had approached her about teaching again. She was considering it. She liked the ranch work, liked the household, liked the life she'd built inside these mountains. But she'd been made to teach. Some things don't change just because the setting does. Agnes was behind the post office counter when she arrived. Agnes looked at the letter, then at Adeline, with the shrewd assessment of someone who has watched a great many things unfold in a small place. "You look different than when you got here," Agnes said. Adeline considered that. "I'm the same," she said. "I just stopped pretending to be less." Agnes stamped the letter with a thump. Took you about 4 months, she said. Most people take longer. Some people never get there. She handed back the change, and Adeline walked out into the Montana afternoon, into the wide sky, and the cold, clean air, and the particular satisfaction of a life that finally fit. She hadn't become someone new in Rimrock Station. She'd just finally had the room to be exactly who she already was. And that, it turned out, was more than enough. I think about Adeline sometimes when I'm watching someone shrink themselves to fit a room that was never built for them. She didn't arrive in Montana with anything remarkable. No beauty that stopped strangers in the street, no family name that opened doors, no savings that gave her options. What she had was a mind that worked fast and honest, a spine that didn't bend when people expected it to, and the particular kind of courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside. It just looks like showing up and doing the next thing. That's the part people miss. They see the ending, Adeline standing in her garden in the long afternoon light, a man who loves her, a child who calls her mother, a town that asks her opinion on things that matter. And they think something was given to her. It wasn't. Every single piece of it was earned, and was earned in the specific way that things get earned in difficult country, by making the right call when it would have been easier not to. When Declan had that ranch hand up against the post, Adeline could have gone back to the laundry. Nobody would have blamed her. It wasn't her barn, technically. It wasn't her fight, but she understood something that took me a long time to learn myself, that doing right by people is not a calculation about whose fight it is. It's a choice you make, because the alternative is becoming the kind of person who walks past things. She stepped in. She didn't humiliate anyone. She found the path that let everyone keep their dignity and still corrected what was wrong. That's not just decency. That's a skill, and it's one she'd been building her whole life without anyone noticing. Then there's what she did with that forged survey. She sat down with a pile of old documents at a kitchen table in the middle of nowhere, and she found the one thing a trained lawyer had missed, because she paid attention to history when it wasn't useful yet. That's the thing about real intelligence. It doesn't announce itself. It accumulates quietly in the years when nobody's watching, and then one day it saves everything. Adeline had been building that knowledge in a classroom where the school board thought she had too many opinions, in a life where people looked past her on their way to something prettier. She kept learning anyway. That is what I mean when I say intelligence is a moral act. You choose it even when the world isn't rewarding you for it yet. And she stayed. That's the one I come back to. When Vance made his threat, when the winter closed in, when Harlan handed her his silence, like it was all he had to give. She stayed. Not because she had nowhere else to go. She'd proven by then she could handle herself. She stayed because she decided this was worth building, and she didn't let fear write that decision for her. Perseverance like that isn't stubbornness. It's a form of faith in your own judgment. The willingness to see something through to what it can actually become, instead of what it looks like on the hard days. What happened to Adeline Marsh was not luck. It was the accumulated consequence of a woman who kept choosing right over easy, kept using her mind even when no one was grading her on it, and kept going when going was the only thing she could control. The world has a way of catching up to that kind of person, eventually. It just requires that you stay long enough to let it.